It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. This week, I'm going to jump into one of my favorite comic books ever, and the one comic that convinced me that Superman can still be a compelling character all these years later. With the Superman movie coming out this summer, I thought it was the perfect time to revisit my favorite Superman story of all time, and that is Superman for All Seasons. Growing up, I was not a Superman guy. Even as a kid, when Superman the animated series was on TV, I just never found him particularly relatable or interesting. I liked Spider-Man because he seemed much more flawed, and I liked Batman because he was much darker, and I liked the Street Sharks and Beast Wars and things like that in the 90s, right? But Superman always seemed too clean-cut and old-fashioned, and I never found him interesting. Cut to several years later, and I read Superman for All Seasons for the first time, and my opinion on Superman did a 180, completely changed. And it's not because in that book, Superman shows off his awesome powers, or Superman shows himself to be particularly dark or flawed or anything like that. It's because behind the Man of Steel, there is a heart greater than any other superhero. And it's this compassion and humanity that he shows in the pages of this comic book that make him the hero that he is. And when that, I had that realization, I became a Superman fan too. So today, instead of just showing you the comic book, I'm gonna talk about it a few different ways and tell you what I think is so great about it and why this is, for me, the quintessential Superman story and a must-read for any comic book fan. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the story and the themes. Now, if you're a longtime Superman fan, no doubt you're familiar with this one. But if you're just a new comic book fan or someone looking to get into Superman or to discover your next favorite comic book, no worries, no spoilers here. The story is told expertly by this superpower couple, Jeph, not that they're a couple, but duo, I should say, Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale. Jeph Loeb on writing and Tim Sale on art. And really together they tell the story so well. I'll tell you, if it wasn't for Tim Sale's art, I don't think the story would come across as strongly as it does. So I really want to lump him in there as a storyteller and not just as the artist on this book. Anyway, the story is told in an interesting structure over 4 seasons, hence Superman for All Seasons, and from 4 different points of view, none of which are Superman's. So we always have the impression when we're reading a book that we are seeing this Superman through the eyes of some of the people closest to him at different points in his life. Those 4 points of view are Pa Kent, Lois Lane, Lex Luthor, and Lana Lang, Clark's high school sweetheart. And I think the greatest thing about Superman for All Seasons thematically is the humanity that it shows in this character, that he isn't just all superpowers and cosmic fight scenes and, alien from another planet, but that he is a man behind that Man of Steel. And that man is the great hero, not the hero in the cape and tights that we're so familiar with. Another thing I really need to talk about is Tim Sale's unbelievable art. Guys, this is one of the best looking comics of all time, in my opinion. I don't know that I can put many comics ahead of Superman for All Seasons as far as looks. And it's not just Tim Sale's art which really comes through. And I'm sure right now I'm showing you all kinds of Tim Sale art. I'm sure we're panning over beautiful set pieces right now and the incredible Clark Kent scenes on Kent Farm and Superman flying through Metropolis happening probably right over my head right now. But besides Tim Sale's incredible art, which is so, in many ways, humanizing over in Smallville and larger, grander, and looming as it is in Metropolis, the colors by Bjarne Hansen are perfect. You couldn't have had a better colorist on this book than Bjarne Hansen, whose almost like watercolor paintings reminded me so much when I was reading it of like memories like taking you back to a time before, a simpler time on Kent Farm, taking you back to childhood in Smallville where things were simpler, and then to Metropolis where things get a little more cynical and a little colder, and then to the winter where Clark returns and he's weighted down by the expectations and responsibility that he's assumed as Superman, and he comes home kind of alone and defeated. And without Bjarne Hansen creating that tone and that mood with his colors, again, I don't think the story comes across as strongly and as powerfully and as emotionally as it really does. And just on Bjarne Hansen, just a little aside, he's a guy who didn't do a lot of comics. I looked him up recently after rereading this for this episode, and I'm like, hey, how come there isn't more Bjarne Hansen? He's incredible. So then the other night, I'm reading comics, as I do, and I'm reading Starman, James Robinson's Starman. And lo and behold, it's like issue 4 or 5. I'm sure I'm correcting myself right now on this screen in front of you. Bjarne Hansen on colors. What a pleasant surprise. And how, who knew? So anyways, the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to Superman for All Seasons and why it's quintessential Superman is the influence it's had and the influence I hope it has on the films. The emotional core of Superman for All Seasons is something I really hope we see in the Superman movie coming up this summer, the James Gunn Superman. I really hope James Gunn has the ability as a director to bring the humanity and the soul of Clark Kent to Superman, because without it, a cold and unapproachable and intimidating and overpowered Superman doesn't come across, I don't think. And I think the heart of the character actually has been on the screen before. And it was best put there by Christopher Reeve, who played Clark Kent better, I think, than anyone we've ever had on screen. He had an ability to joke around, to bring a levity to scenes, to be small and humble, and to be grand and powerful. And there's a scene I wish I could show you, but it's kind of long, so I'll just try to tell you about it. There's this scene in the movie, and if you haven't seen it, definitely do before the James Gunn movie, where Superman is doing an interview with Lois Lane, like on the rooftop of her apartment, right? And it turns all romantic and flirty, and she's like completely falling in love with him, like this incredible icon that he is. And he takes her flying through Metropolis at night. It's like this sweeping scene. And when she gets back to her apartment and he leaves her, there's a knock at the door, and it's Clark. And he's like, hey, Lois, you ready for our date? And she's like, oh yeah, Clark, I'll go get ready. And she is completely disinterested in poor Clark Kent because she's been swept off her feet literally by Superman. And there's a moment where Lois walks away from him. And, Clark's posture is kind of bad, and he has his glasses on and his hair's parted. And he's like, Lois, he calls to her, and he takes his glasses off and he straightens his back, and his face changes, like he becomes Superman then. And then he thinks twice about it, and he shrinks, and he puts his glasses back on, and he says, never mind. That's the heart of Superman, right? That's the man who could be king of the world. He could have all the power of the known universe, but he sacrifices it. He allows responsibility to dictate that moral compass, right? That's why he's Superman, because he's the man with the power of total greatness inside of him, right? If he wanted to be the champion of the world, if he wanted to be the greatest baseball player who ever lived, whatever he wanted to do, he could. And what did he choose? He chose to be a hero. He chose to sacrifice everything so that he could help. And that's why he's Superman. And that is so hard, I'm sure, to get across on the screen, So while Christopher Reeve brought that humanity to the role, I think the deck is stacked against James Gunn and David Cornsweet this summer. But I really hope they do their research, or that they did their research, and I really hope they read Superman for All Seasons, because the heart of the character is in this book. The standout moment for me in Superman for All Seasons is another of these heartfelt moments. There are, and it's not to say that there aren't any, big epic pieces in the book. There are some incredible set pieces where where Superman in Metropolis appears as this like figure from the heavens, right? But for me, the greatness of Superman, like I've said now, is in the heart of Superman, right? Behind that giant S on his chest is his true greatest power, and that's his heart. And you see it for the first time early on in the book, where Clark is at prom like every other kid with his high school sweetheart, Lana Lang. And they're having the best time, right? They grew up together. They're next door neighbors. They're both of them kind of orphans, right? Growing up raised by people who aren't actually their parents. And Lana loves Clark. You know, she sees a future with him. You know it. You see it every time she's around him. Like, this girl sees, that's her life, Clark Kent. And he takes her up to the hill. You know, it's nighttime. The moon is out. You have these beautiful colors by Bjarne Hansen again in this scene. And he says, Lana, give me your hands. And she puts her hands in Clark's, giant mitts, right? She thinks he's about to propose. You know, like, this boy who I've loved all my life, he's about to be my husband forever. We're going to be together forever, me and Clark Kent. And he lifts her. And they lift together, like off the ground. They levitate. And she's freaking like, what, Clark, what are you doing? And he's like, don't worry, Lana, it's okay. And he flies her around Metropolis that night on prom night. And she's like, not in awe, not overjoyed, not excited, not laughing, right? Why? Because she knows, this girl from Smallville, that Clark Kent is too big for the town they grew up in. That Clark is destined to go on and do much bigger things. And that boy from Smallville that she fell in love with will never be the boy from Smallville that she fell in love with. That he will be the people's hero now, not the dutiful husband that she wishes he could be. So anyway, it's a very powerful little scene there where Clark grows up, right? And that initial responsibility, he takes it on his shoulder. And I think that a little moment like that really defines the book and really helps define who Superman is as a hero. For me, Superman for All Seasons is the quintessential Superman story. I don't think you even need to read another one, in all honesty. If you're a new reader, if you're a longtime fan, if you're somebody looking to get into comics or looking to get into Superman, Superman for All Seasons is the book for you. It's because it takes relatable themes like growing up and expectations and responsibility and dreams and ambitions and pressure and failure. And it brings those things to a character like Superman who feels like he should be beyond all those things, but he isn't. In many ways, he's one of the most relatable superheroes there is because of his humble origins and because who he is behind that big red S on his chest and about who he has to be to everybody because of the powers he has and the choice he makes not to be great, but to just be good. For me, Jeph, Loeb, and Tim Sale have made a masterpiece here. And next week on the show, we're talking Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale's The Long Halloween. So guys, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the show and stay tuned for more next week. I'm Dill Comic Books and I'll see you then.